Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in St Pancras Old Church graveyard. So this church, which stands hard by, supposedly was founded in 1314 during the Roman era, and people say that's the oldest Christian place of worship in Europe. Now that's probably not true. There's definitely been a church there from the 12th century, possibly before. Some of the Norman masonry survives. But what I'm really here to do is to talk about the tomb here of Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. So she's born Mary Wollstonecraft in, let me see, 1759 in London, not too far from here, an area called Newington. She was brought up a dissenter, that's to say a Protestant outside the Church of England, and there was a cluster of dissenters around there. So she's an incredibly bookish sort. She came from a middle-class family. She didn't get on well with her father in particular. She was fairly young when her father died. She more or less had to bring up her sister herself, but made her own way in the world, was very independent-minded and very morally courageous. Don't want to tell you the whole story of it, but she was a governess in Ireland and so on. She was a school mom, and she's really the mother of modern feminism. In 1791, if I've got that right, she published a vindication of the rights of women, because the French Revolution had taken place 2 years earlier, and the rights of man and of citizen had been proclaimed by the French revolutionaries. Thomas Paine was to publish a similar tract. Anyway, so she had a succession of boyfriends. She had a liaison with a married man. She lived in revolutionary France for a while, so she gave birth outside wedlock, and then she got married to William Godwin, who's a well-known coffee house owner and a political philosopher. Published a work entitled Political Justice. So they were part of the London Radicali. That's not a formal organisation. There were many such radical movements in London at the time, or organisations like the Society for Constitutional Information, the London Corresponding Society, the Revolution Society, and so on. The Revolution Society didn't want a revolution at that time, but they were simply celebrating the legacy of the 1688 revolution. They were founded a century later, but for the furtherance of reform. Anyhow, so she gave birth in 1797 to her daughter Mary Godwin, but Mary Wollstonecraft, that being her maiden name, I'm just calling her Mary Wollstonecraft to distinguish her from her daughter Mary Godwin, because both mother and daughter are Mary Godwin. One's a Mrs. Mary Godwin, the other's a Miss Mary Godwin. This woman here, she died of puerperal fever only a few days after giving birth to her child. Anyway, so she was celebrated at the time, but also derided, a hyena in petticoats. People savaged her. When it came to light that she'd given birth to a child out of wedlock, which would be the paramour of a married man, she was absolutely savaged in the Tory and Whig press. So yeah, here she was buried, and her daughter Mary Godwin grew up in the same sort of radical circles that her mother had moved in. Anyway, so Mary Godwin, that's the daughter, she became the lover of the celebrated poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, and the two often had their trysts here. Now, there was one small problem. Shelley's wife. At the age of 19, he'd been sent out from Oxford. He'd run off with Harriet Westbrook, and they'd gone to Gretna Green in Scotland, the first town in North Britain, and they'd wed there, because they could do so without parental permission. Remember, you had to have your parents say so to marry below the age of 1 and 20 back then. However, in England and Wales, if you went to Scotland and you married, when you returned to England or Wales, that marriage was still legally recognised. So they came back, and they had 2 children in short order. They were soon short of money. Shelley came from a wealthy landowning family. His father, Sir Thomas Shelley, was a Whig MP, and his father was irate about this marriage and cut him off without a bean. So Shelley was borrowing heavily. Remember, in those days, debt was a criminal matter. You could be going to Newgate Prison or Marshalsea Prison, just like John Dickens, the father of Charles Dickens, a little later. Anyway, William Godwin was aware that his daughter had taken a shine to the penniless poet, but nevertheless encouraged the budding romance. He thought the liaison would redound to his credit, because at some point Sir Thomas would die and Percy Bysshe would inherit the considerable family fortune. It was perhaps an unsafe assumption, because although Percy was due to inherit the baronetcy, he wouldn't automatically inherit the property. His father could just give that away or write him out of his will. But anyway, so Shelley and Mary Godwin, they met here to talk about running away together. And legend has it that Mary Godwin lost her maidenhood right here beside her mother's tomb. I'm not sure if that's true. But anyway, they did eventually move away together, and they travelled around mainland Europe, France, into Switzerland and Italy with John Polidori and others. And there, in a summer of notoriously bad weather in Switzerland, they had a ghost story writing competition. Lord Byron was there too, and that's where Mary Shelley both conceived her first baby and indeed conceived her first novel, Frankenstein. So it's often called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Anyway, Percy Bysshe, he later died at Livorno in Italy, or Leghorn, we call it, when their boat capsized. The others of the boat survived, and his body was cremated on the beach at Viareggio. I've been to Viareggio, but I didn't find any memorial there. I should look harder. Anything else about these two? Anyway, so she lived on into the 1850s, became rather wealthy. So some of her, she had 2 children with Shelley, one of whom died. Shelley died in 1822. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft no longer lies here. She and her husband William Godwin, they're both exhumed and reburied in Bournemouth. So you can see the railway line hard by that links to St Pancras Station, St Pancras International. You can take the choo-choo from there to Paris and Brussels. What else can I say? There are many tombs of distinguished persons here, such as the Burdett-Coutts family, and many French émigrés who came here after the French Revolution lie interred in this. It's Anglican soil, but they were allowed to be buried here anyway, including Roman Catholic clergy. Yeah, so some more famous people buried here. But when they built the railway there, they had to move all that. And they had to move a lot of tombs. So Thomas Hardy, who was an architectural student, he was in charge of actually exhuming and moving some of these centuries-old corpses and piling up their headstones over there. I could give you a full tour of it some other time. So that's it. It's incredibly historic. It's an island of placidity in the middle of London, in this area of Camden. So do take a stroll and be pensive, reflect upon mortality, on attempts to escape mortality, something I always wish to do, and these tombs to do it. But reading about these purpose trusts in English law makes me think, yes, you can set up a trust for the maintenance of a headstone or mausoleum or some such, because many of these things, they are moss grown and they're no longer legible. They've been weathered away with the centuries. Such are the vagaries of time, chance, acid rain and wind. All right, toodle pip.